time. It's our time, my friends. Time for millions of maturepreneurs, 55 plus, who are hashtag not done by a long shot, to revolutionize how we lead, do business, and innovate our world. I'm your host, Jeanette Anderson, and welcome to my conversations with fascinating people who would rather inspire than retire. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Maturepreneur podcast. I am your hostess with the mostest, Jeanette Anderson, and today, all the way from Australia, we have the wonderful Kylee Leota, who is here with us, even though it's 7 a.m. in the morning. Way to go, way to be intrepid and get your butt up early, Kylee, and be dressed and beautiful and everything. I love it.
Oh, thank you so much. My grandmother that lived till nearly 107, she was the OG of the morning routine, I reckon. Before, the 5 a.m. club, before all that stuff was happening, she was always up early, and I never understood it when I was younger, but I get it now. Like, I actually like getting up. You can get so much more done.
Awesome. I love it. Okay, well, we'll talk about your morning routine maybe as well as a whole bunch else. The topic today that we're covering, everybody, is really about leadership and specifically infinite leadership and how you can align your personal values with professional goals, enhance your emotional intelligence, and develop a really well-focused leadership style. So whether you're starting your own small enterprise or a side hustle, or you're growing your existing business, or you're creating, benevolent world domination, whatever level you're at, hopefully it's benevolent. There you are a leader, whether you're in your community volunteering, in your family, you are leading. So these conversations around leadership are not just, they are for everyone. So if you're thinking, well, I'm not a leader, yep, you are. If there are people who watch what you're doing, you're a leader. All right. So we're going
100%.
to talk about how to develop some of those skills, communication skills, practical strategies, and self-awareness techniques, which is really, really important. So I'm glad you're here. I think this is an important conversation, Kylee. So I'm going to read you Kylie's official bio. Then we're going to find out the juicy tidbits behind the scenes. And I always like to say, Kylee, the juicier, the better, right? So,
Right.
we'll go for the salacious, and that's really good. And then we're going to hop into our topic and talk about meaning and leadership and all sorts of things. So, Kylee Leota is a visionary leader dedicated to transforming the way people approach leadership and personal growth. As the founder of Four Elements for Success, she focuses on bridging the gap between personal values and professional aspirations. With a wealth of experience in education and coaching, Kylee offers a unique perspective on leading with authenticity and emotional intelligence. Her passion for empowering others shines through in her engaging presentations, where she shares practical strategies for achieving true alignment in work and life. So I love that, especially the true alignment, because there's a lot of theory, but not necessarily a lot of an experience of finding what is aligned for us. So
Mm,
there's no one cookie cutter solution for that. So
no,
welcome. I'm glad you're here. And
thank you so
by the
much.
way, remind me later, we'll talk about your new book that's coming out. Congratulations on that.
Thank you so much.
Leadership. So we're going to get into leadership, but tell me first of all, why this topic, but also what's your why? Why do you do what you do?
Mm, mm. It's really interesting because I actually went back into Simon Sinek's Why a fair few years ago because I had a significant injury. And at the time, I couldn't work. And I'm like, oh my God, who am I if I am not this educator and if I'm not this person? Because I'd always thought my why was about education and confusing, like many people do, the who I am with why I am the way that I am.
Mhm.
And so it was only after doing that unpacking with a few, ugly tears, that I realized that my why has always been around empowerment. And one of the things that, even from a little girl, and I mentioned my nana in the very intro, when
Mhm.
I was little, I was my nana's right-hand person. So I would be walking around, visiting all the people, doing all those things. So my life of service and empowering was started when I was like 2 and 3 and 4. I was always that shadow in walking alongside with her. And as I navigated and got really clear on my why, that allowed me to pivot and recalibrate. And that has been a really key integral piece of my journey, this going through these different things in my life. And as we get to different stage, if we keep that alignment with our why, I think it makes that recalibration and that pivoting that is required at different ages and stages a lot easier. And so I support people, and I think people get very attached to an identity of who they think they are.
Mhm.
And there's an African gentleman by the name of Vusi Thembekwayo, and he said, identity is man made, so thereby it can be man changed.
Mm,
And so it was this powerful piece around, well, I may have been this person for 20, 30, 40 years. Who am I going to be in this next stage of my life? And what are the attributes that I need? And what can I do about that rather than being stuck in this identity that I created to myself, that I am attached to,
mm,
that when I'm needing to transition into this, maybe this next phase of my life, I can't let go of. And I feel like a sense of failure, or I'm, feeling really overwhelmed, or things. So being able to create my why, which is really about empowerment of others, but recognizing that empowerment of self is the way that I can empower others. So if I'm not empowering myself in my own journey, I will be less transformational for others. So that empowerment piece is all encompassing around what that looks like moving forward.
mm. There's a lot in what you just said that I think is really valuable and important. And I love your comments on identity because that's such a big thing that people struggle with, especially as we get older. Who am I if I'm not my roles? What happens when
Mm.
our roles change and who are we? Because we, in our, especially in Western society, are so taught to be defined by the roles we play rather than who we are. Love the quote, would love to get the proper spelling of his name later.
Will do.
I'm sure I did not write it down right. So let's come back to and so in all of that, I heard a number of things, but what would you say your like core purpose is then? Because you mentioned service and you mentioned, a bunch of different things. What's your core purpose?
To help people find and define what success looks like for them. Earl Nightingale's quote says that success is the ongoing progressive realization of a worthy goal or ideal. And I think that, the business elements of success is there's lots of different elements that make that up. And I think people get lost. We can't make the excuse that we don't have access to information anymore because we're bombarded with it. But how do we delineate what elements we need to create what success looks like for us? And then my, purpose in my work is around helping people align the theory of what that looks like into practice. Because we talk about self-awareness, and self-awareness is a lot of theoretical unpacking stuff. But then what? What happens then? And how do we apply that into our lives? And I think with the bombardment of information, I think that's where people sometimes get stuck. We get access, we don't know how to delineate which one works for us because there's just so much, and sometimes we try and do it all.
Mm,
And then how do we put that into practice to get to our what success looks like for us? And
mhm.
that's what I'm really passionate about helping people do.
I like that. And I agree with you. We get bombarded. And not only is there too much information, we often listen most to the one from, or the messaging and or the sales from the one who is the most confident, which is not necessarily the one who is the most competent and not necessarily
Yeah,
the one that's
for
right
sure.
for us. I know, especially in our expertpreneur online world, there's a lot of, this is the way to do it. This is the way to build your business. This is the way to create success. This is the way to, and those cookie cutter solutions don't work for everyone. And, I believe cookie cutters are made for cookies, not for people or business models or lives or, etc. So I really like your comment about we need to define what success is for us and how that
Mm,
looks.
mm,
And then call in the support that's appropriate to that.
mm.
So now tell us something about you we wouldn't guess from your website or your bio or something like that. What would be really surprising that people wouldn't guess about you, Kylee, sorry.
Oh gosh, there's so many things. So one thing is my youngest client is 5. My oldest client is 65.
Okay.
And so I guess with my passion and background for education, I often think, I learned all of these things in my, 40s and the like. Oh my gosh, wouldn't it be great if people knew this stuff earlier? We'd have a less time. So, and educator still at heart. So I still, I see young people, and my background is in complex disability and trauma. So I'm like, I joke that I'm the Mary Poppins of strategies.
Mhm.
It's around, so going back to that not one size fits all model, never ever in my career have I ever had a one size fits all model. And the education system, to be clear, tries the cookie cutter approach, which clearly doesn't work.
Okay.
I also think you may not know, but I do a lot of work with the deaf and hard of hearing community. So in the deaf community, you can only be given a sign name by a deaf member of the community. You can't assign yourself a name. That's something that only a deaf member can have. And a couple of years ago, I was very, very blessed. An interpreter was talking to one of my clients. I was running a workshop, and they're like, "What's Kylie's sign name?" And she gave me a sign name, which is the K in ASL, with the sign for angel.
Oh,
And one of the things that she said was, in my life, Kylie had been an angel for me, helping me unpack information that I have never been had the opportunity to access. And so I'm very, very passionate in that space. And one of my oldest clients, one of the gentlemen that's 65, he's profoundly deaf. He's going through a career transition at the moment. He's trying to move off where he is and not be defined by being a member of the community who is profoundly deaf.
hmm.
And so there's all of these, lessons that we work on. But I think that's something that you wouldn't necessarily know about me, but it's a piece of my work that I'm very passionate about. And I think that's part of it is some people, there's lots of information out there, but how do we have access to the right information and who supports us to unpack that information in the right way so that we can apply it to ourselves? So I love that sort of stuff. I also love the beach. If there's anyone that's got a beach and they would like me to run a workshop, please feel free. Like I'd be there in a heartbeat. Um,
Do you have reduced rates for beach front resorts or
sure.
workshops?
Yeah, I'll run a reduced rate
Yeah.
because it'll be filling my cup.
Yeah.
I also have three children that I raised by myself with 100% care and are still all intact. Um, uh, and they're 19, 18, just turned 18 and 11. And I have 100% care. And so I left my business, my government job in the middle of COVID as 100% full-time carer for my three children to start my own business, which sounds a bit crazy, but in actual fact has been me walking my talk that I talk to my clients about having my own back and doing those kind of things. And they're
Wow.
amazing. They're all crazy, but they're amazing. Like, I love them dearly. And they're so uniquely different. I'm like, you all are mine, but you're so different. Goodness me.
They're the expressions of the different components of you and their own unique exploration of what they're exploring in
Oh,
the universe. So, um,
they're
uh,
hilarious.
tell me what you about your 5-year-old client because I know people are going to be sitting there wondering, 5-year-old
Mhm.
clients do what now?
Yeah. So
She didn't pay
I,
you directly. I'm guessing she has a backer.
yeah, she has a backup. She has a backup. So what happens, I still work a lot in neuro inclusion and neurodiversity, and that is something that really, is becoming more prevalent post-COVID. People in their 40s and 50s and sometimes even 60s getting diagnoses of neurodiversity that, when I see late diagnosed clients, are like, oh my God, that makes so much sense about the rest of my whole entire life.
Mhm.
And then I've got little people. So she is a part of a family that I work with as in coaching. And one of the things that really is really difficult sometimes is people find it really hard to be able to express what they mean in a way that can find meaningful strategies for them. And that's certainly been her story. And there's been a lot of unhealthy and unsafe behaviors that have happened. So she will actually ring her mum and she's like, yeah, you need to talk to Kylie, or you need to call Kylie. I need to speak to her. And she'll ring, and her mum's really great. She'll put her on FaceTime and she's like, now, Kylie, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, so and I actually coach, it's that emotional regulation piece and it's around coaching, but it's also about the fact that because I've done this work for so long, she doesn't really need to explain what's going on in her brain. I kind of just get it. And what she needs right now is a safe person to help her make meaning of her world and get her the outcome that she needs, not at the expense of anybody else.
Mhm.
Right?
Right.
And so I love the fact that her family have created this space where, anyone can call Kylie, and I'll get text from one of the other children as well going, "Hey Kylie, this isn't working for me," or "I'm really annoyed." And we've created a family trust circle where we have safe and supportive spaces to help everybody with all of their different lenses in which they view the world get a positive, more beneficial relationship in their family and to get their support. So it's not just the adults telling kids what to do. It's about children having a voice in a respectful way and being able to communicate that moving forward.
That sounds like a really fascinating client and kind of work to do. What got you so interested in, well, first of all, what brought you to the work that you do with deaf people? I'm assuming that you have
Mm,
something of that in your family, and the same thing with the neurodiversity components. How did you find
yeah.
all of that?
So when I was young, I wanted to be a music teacher. That's how this all started. Apparently, you need musical talent for that. Who knew? Then I wanted to be a PE teacher, like every child of the 90s here in Australia. I think that was a bit of a phase. And then I did some work experience in a school with people with quite severe disabilities.
Mm,
And I remember at the time going, "Oh my goodness, this is like so overwhelming." And I'm like, "No, yeah, I can't do that." And I went through a few different career options and did a few different things. But I just came back to going back to my empowerment piece, I think, is the fact that this social justice lens of helping the underdog, of somebody who is quite capable of doing things if the world is supportive around them.
mhm.
And I went to a school where we had a very big blind unit where that we had kids that had vision, they call it vision impaired, but blind or, low sight. And so I've always been exposed, and my grandmother didn't always have the right terminology for it, let me tell you. No, she was born in 1913. They talked about things differently then. But I would hear different stories. So I didn't actually specifically have any particular connection to death, but over my career, had a lot of exposures to lots of different disabilities. But also, one of my specialization areas was people with multiple diagnoses. Because what would happen is people would go and get support in one area, like, I don't know, you've got arthritis, and you go to a doctor that treats your specific physical symptoms.
Mhm.
But arthritis can also cause anxiety and depression and all of those kind of things. And this person only did this thing. And then you'd have to go see somebody different to do this thing. And then you'd have to go see somebody different to this thing. And sometimes you'd end up seeing 6 or 7 different people.
Right.
And I'm like the person that puts the puzzle together and helps someone make sense of their whole world,
Mhm.
regardless of what that is. So my expertise and experience was around, there hasn't been a diagnosis I've come across that I'm like, okay, I don't know what this is. And helping people make sense of the world because people are going through difficult times, and that can be health issues, that can be actual disabilities, feel like there's something wrong with them. And my job has always been to show them that there's not, and there's a pathway through that
Mm.
and support them in that journey. And that has led to, and it's quite interesting because here in Australia, I remember a client coming to see me and it was deaf, and I'm like, "So, what brings you here today?" And they're like, "I got told to come and see you," and I'm like, "Okay, so what is it that you want to work towards?" And by the end of the conversation, they're like, "You really do get it. Like you do really get it." And for people that have got diagnoses, whether it be health, mental health, disability, they don't want to keep explaining themselves.
Mhm.
So if they can walk into a room and somebody can hold space for them and already know some of the challenges they're facing, so they don't actually have to explain to somebody why this is so hard to do the thing,
Mhm.
then we can actually start taking action a lot earlier and get the outcomes. And we can remove those barriers and limitations by explaining to somebody who doesn't get it, who's going to start putting out these solutions that aren't going to work for me
Yeah.
because they come in and so we've been able to take action a lot sooner, a lot faster with higher greater rates of success because they're like, "Oh, thank God I don't have to explain this to you. You kind of just get it.
Right.
Right, let's go."
So it's really interesting because you have what is uh, what sounds like three kind of major niches. One is
Yeah.
working with families and diversity, and maybe even more, but that we've talked about so far. Families with lots of diversity issues and helping them bridge that, and that probably is the same with teams, etc. People with
Yes.
quote unquote disabilities or different abilities that need support with being understood and supported in doing things and navigating the world in a way that works for them.
Mm.
And you also do executive coaching and work with leaders
Yeah.
that we would normally think of as leaders in terms of people who lead companies and organizations
Yeah.
and so forth. How did those come together in your mind and in your world?
Yeah, so one of the things I learned so when I started out, I actually didn't aspire to be a leader. That wasn't actually in the forefront of my mind. I just wanted to get in, I wanted to serve, I wanted to support. And I learned pretty quickly that I couldn't change things where I was at.
Mm,
And I couldn't get the outcomes that I thought that I needed to happen. So I didn't aspire to be a leader because I wanted the money. I didn't aspire to be a leader because I wanted the power. I wanted to be a leader because I'm like, this person needs this thing and we can't get it here. Who do I need to be
mhm.
able to have some influence and some authority to make these changes and change this outcome? And what I have seen in my work over the 25, 30 years that I've been playing in this space is it's really great to empower the individual. And that self leadership piece that you kind of mentioned at the beginning, it doesn't matter where you are, you're a leader of self, first and foremost. But I can give people all the tools and the strategies, and they'll be doing an amazing job. And then they'll hit a ceiling or they'll hit a block. And that often comes from leaders and organizations not understanding what that needs to look like moving forward. So I top and tail it to because if I can create coaching experiences for executives and leaders that make them better leaders,
Mhm.
then they're going to be more open to be able to have sustainable practice that are going to serve these people that I also help, navigate their world. And it's going to remove barriers. And I have this really amazing client who's trying to return to the workforce at the moment after a 2-year leave of absence through a variety of different reasons. Her skills are not the problem. The organization and the way that they navigate and their lack of understanding of what she needs moving forward is the barrier.
Mhm.
So getting into the organization and doing the leadership and the executive coaching up here is going to create a much more psychologically safe space and overarching better environment for all employees and all staff, including themselves, not just this one person that needs it. So we
Right.
can't, that's where it sort of stemmed from was me going, well, I've taught all these people these really great skills and they're learning to advocate and they're coaching, through their coaching, they're hitting their goals out of the ballpark, but they're hitting ceilings. Right. What are those ceilings and how do we get that? And so, out of the box thinking is instead of going this way, I'm going to go that way and create those multi-tiered approaches to getting better outcomes for everyone.
All right. Well, so what I heard is the through thread there is that, and kind of it ties back into you where it does tie back into your purpose of really wanting to support. I would call them those who don't have a voice, who are not
Mm.
perhaps accepted or included as much as they could or should be, and with navigation. So the three things that I really hear for all three markets that you're providing is a voice, helping them find and express their voice or their perspective, acceptance of where they're at and an understanding of themselves and others, and a way to navigate to where they want to get to next. So it makes sense that that works in all those different arenas. So let's talk about leadership. What's the what's your fascination with it?
Through my own personal journey, I experienced domestic violence. I've been a single parent. I've been through lots of different stuff. And therapeutic supports have been helpful to a point. But what actually changed my life and my trajectory was applying leadership concepts into my own world
Mm,
and navigating, understanding that I first had to lead myself before I led my children, before I led my organization, before I led anything, my business, is that I first had to lead myself. And I know this is awful. There are some amazing therapeutic supports out there. So I want to be really clear with that. There are some amazing people out there. There are also some not really great people out there.
mhm.
And we've probably all come across them at some point in our lives. And had I listened to a particular person, I may not actually even be here. And so I had to go, whoa, hey, cool, hang on a second. what do I need to do right now? And that's that, so that's where that leadership stuff started for me personally. And I also think leadership is done quite poorly. Still, we know a lot about leadership. You only have to go on Amazon. There's like 50,000 books on leadership. But it's not always done well. We again, theory. We've got lots of theories that are really great. The implementation lets us down all the time, both personally and professionally. I think, and in the families I work with or with the organizations I work with, what's letting them down is the application piece around that work. And I also, there's a book by a lady by the name of Glennon Doyle, and she has a book called Untamed.
Named
And she
one of
said,
my favorite books.
yeah, and she says, my children don't need me to save them. They need to watch me save myself.
Yes.
And that's leadership. What
Yeah.
am I modeling here right now? And so, even organizationally, what am I modeling here right now? Or in the community, what am I modeling here right now? And even in my own domestic violence experience, which, his behavior is his responsibility. I want to be very clear on that. But, by me not speaking up or by me this, I modeled that it was okay, to be treated like that. And so I had to start with changing myself. I have no control over his behavior, but I had to start with modeling, my own behavior about what was okay for me and what wasn't okay for me. And I wanted to model for others, whether it be a relationship, whether in an organization, what was okay, how people could treat me and how they didn't treat me. And so at my core, everything I do, I think sits with leadership because it's always about how am I leading myself. I've got a book coming out. Oh my gosh, the timeline, the editor, the publisher, blah, 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 blah. Right. How am I leading myself right now? What do I need to do to get this to where I want to go?
Right.
And what supports do I need to take on board? Instead of always looking at, they didn't do this or they didn't do that. That may be true, but what do I need to do to change the outcome rather than always just laying blame on,
Yeah.
others?
So what is your definition of a leader? Is that your definition? It's the person who is aware of what they're modeling and chooses that consciously? What's your definition of a leader?
Oh, I think a leader is the person that, yeah, so John Maxwell, the person that models the way, so he has a really great definition around that, shows the way, it goes the way. So it's that, it's not just, it's about that walking in alignment with your talk, right? I remember I had this leader once and he talked about the say do gap. Don't say it and then don't do it, the say do gap.
Okay.
So and then he had the biggest say do gap ever. He was like, he talked, and I'm like, this is really important. And then he was the worst at it. So this misalignment, so I think leaders underestimate, whether you're a leader in your own personal life. So somebody who's aware that you have impact wherever you go and make conscious choices to model the way and to recognize that leadership is a both and journey. It's not an either or. It's not me or them. It's a both and journey, and that we can rise together.
Talk a little bit more about the both and. I'm a big stand for the and. It's even the beginning of my name, Anderson. But
Yes.
a lot of the work that I do with people is getting out of that either or dichotomous mindset that we often have into a
Mm,
both and. What could be possible if we came at it from a different perspective of
mm.
blues, black, white, either or, and thought thought a bigger had a bigger inclusive, more inclusive idea. So talk a little bit more when you say both and either or. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I'll tell you a little story. So when I was in I was working in a high school, and we had a school swimming carnival, and I had a young refugee student who's like, Miss, I'm an excellent swimmer. And I'm like, I'm not as confident as you are. And his whole right side of his brain was a tumor.
Mhm.
So I'm all about empowerment, right? So I'm like, well, we'll work it out, but we're going to get down there. We're going to get to the pool. He's like, I'm an excellent swimmer. And I don't know if it's the same in, globally, but PE teachers, health and physical education teachers in Australia are pretty chill. They're kind of pretty relaxed, and there's pretty standard saying in Australia, she'll be right, mate. And so I said to them, I'm like, so what happens if he can't actually swim? And they said, she'll be right, mate. And anyway, so the gun goes off, he dives in, and he sinks to the bottom of the pool. And I'm looking at them and I'm looking back and I'm looking up. And anyway, I'm like, oh, damn it. So I dive into the pool. First and only time I ever wore a white shirt to a school swimming carnival, FYI. Never again did I make that rookie error. Anyway, so we get down, right? But what happens is in that moment, he was panicking, right? He was panicking about himself and what he needed, and he needed to get to the top. He needed to rise up. So what he did in that moment was use my head as leverage to bring himself up, right? So he's pushing me down to
Mhm.
get up. And I think that's what a lot of society does. In order to make me feel good about myself or make me feel better or rise myself up in the promotion field or whatever, I've got to find somebody I can push down. And then
Mhm.
I talk about in the movies, you see, two people stuck in a mine shaft or an elevator shaft, and they work out, how am I going to get out of here? And they stand back to back, link arms, and they put their legs out and they rise up together,
Yes.
right? And I often say to people, don't be the kid in the pool.
Hmm.
Be the person in the mine shaft or the elevator shaft where we can actually, because in marketing and sales, we really promote scarcity model. But
Hmm.
in life is not scarcity. And we
Exactly.
actually go further if we go together. That saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go further, go together. And I think all of the time, and I often sit there and say, okay, so why does it, you know, from a curious perspective, tell me more. Why do you need to do that in order for you to be successful? What's the both and in this scenario? How can we get the win-win rather than if I'm winning, you're losing, or I'm good, you're bad? Because life is messy. It's grey. Very few cases are good, bad, right, wrong, better, worse kind of thing.
Cut and
And
dry.
it's a fluctuating scale. But
Mhm.
I use that kid in the pool analogy to describe, I think, what we do a lot in society, certainly in corporate, and how, as a nature of maybe not having tools and strategies that we learnt when we were young, when we were five, not knowing how to do that better. So better tools will create better outcomes,
Mm.
through that kind of experience.
A great story. I like the illustration, and yeah, it does really make you think about how do you think as a default, for one thing, and what is your problem solving? Are you the one who's likely to come up with going up the shaft by collaboration or working together, or
Mm.
pushing someone down so you can get up? Um, Although all of us would say, no, that's not me, but in practice, it often is. So,
100%.
speaking of tools, you mentioned emotional intelligence, and a lot
Mm.
of people go, "Oh, yeah, that's really important," but they really have no sense of what it actually is or how you develop it. And
Mm.
as leaders, that's a very important ability and skill. So, what
Mm.
does it mean, and how can we develop more of it?
Yeah. So the original, I guess, godfather of emotional intelligence is Daniel Goleman, and he talks about self-awareness. I'm actually aware of my feelings, and a really great example of this is I work with a lot of men that anger is a default response
Hmm.
because they've just grown up, and every time something happened, they just presented that as angry. And part of our work is, are you actually angry? Or are you anxious? Are you actually, like, let's label it correctly. What is the correct emotion? Because what you display outwardly is not always what's actually going on inside.
Hmm.
So helping people name it accurately, because then you can address the problem accurately. Because if you only present as angry, guess how people respond to you? As angry. So that you're not going to get the right strategy to support what's actually going on for you if we don't get that right. The
Hmm.
second one is self-management. And I often joke, I TikTok is a very interesting space, but I call it the TTD, the TikTok diagnosis, because there's so much out there around, it's okay to feel my feels and it's okay this and, I'm really this and all this kind of stuff, which is true. But the implementation is just because you are frustrated doesn't mean that you can say all of these things to these people and blow up a conversation or blow up all this kind of stuff. So the management piece is, how do you get the outcome you want through that?
Right.
Social awareness is, how do you interact with others, and then how do you manage those interactions? But Timothy R. Clark, who's done some really profound work in psychological safety, also has added two other domains into his work around emotional intelligence, which is self-regard, what do you think about yourself? And how does that impact how you show up? And social regard, what do you think of others? If you're walking into a meeting and you think everybody's an idiot, how do you show up into that meeting versus going into a meeting thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I've got the opportunity to build capacity here with the team. And so a lot of the work that I do is helping people first understand what feelings are and how not to let them hijack you, because that's part of it. And then what to do with those feelings, because we all feel our feels. And I think generationally, the older generations were certainly not explicitly taught this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge that we've got now is we've raised generations that were explicitly taught this, but are still being led by people that were not taught this stuff. So
Yeah.
now we've got a paradox that
Right.
we're dealing with between generations
Yeah.
on how to navigate this, right?
Yes.
So that's really challenging. So how to hold space, and when I'm talking about, even the AI boom that's sort of happened, is that, generations 40, 50, 60s, that's quite confronting. So who's holding space for people to understand your emotional intelligence about how you're feeling about feeling like out of your depth and unknown, like, I'm going to lose my job and all of this kind of stuff. Because the only way to get people to implement change and implement new innovations is to hold space for how they're feeling about that. It's
Mm-hmm.
not just a get on board mentality. And by implementing this concepts around emotional intelligence through a really strong foundation in psychological safety, then we can actually get people 50s, 60s, 70s taking on board and being less fearful of these new initiatives and innovations that are coming out.
Okay, speaking of that market and that audience, and the first piece of the intergenerational perhaps schisms or different approaches and different ways that we've been brought up, because I've certainly seen
Mm,
that play out where you've got some, and this gross generalization, but I've seen it play out a number of times where you've got a generation that feels their feelings and thinks that they can be out there and express and totally express and so forth, and perhaps haven't learned the filter, the ability to manage and to be effective with
mm,
that. And then you've got, like you said, the generation that by and large didn't learn that and whose answer is predominantly don't say anything, stuff it down, and deal with it later, if at all. Um,
mm,
kind of trying to come together. How can
mm.
older leaders um, have a better understanding of and learn more about that and how to deal with it more effectively other than just making that generation wrong, which is often what happens both ways.
Mm, mm.
Some ways.
I think, yeah. So first of all, people need to be open to the fact that they're open to exploring. So understanding things doesn't mean that you condone it or accept it, right? So just you may never be okay with people feeling all their feels. That's but getting to a point of compassion and understanding around, well, I don't do it this way. They do it this way, and we've got to find some middle ground and almost like establish some protocols in terms of, particularly if you're in an organization, well, I'm not going to be sharing my feels in this meeting, but how I could express my level of comfort or discomfort could be this way. And helping people unpack what that looks like and actually establishing, because conflict is another one that comes from
Mhm.
people feeling all of their feels and feeling like everybody needs to feel their feels versus people that hold it in and explode, or people that are conflict avoidant, that's never been okay. And we create toxic workplaces and toxic cultures by not having, I guess, some protocols about how do we do that. And that, again, that foundation starts in psychological safety. What
Mhm.
does it mean for me as an older generation person to feel like I belong in this organization that is moving at a really rapid pace? I'm feeling like I'm being left behind. What would I need to feel like I belong? And have I communicated that? And just because this is what it looks like for me doesn't mean it looks like that person for someone. So, how do I understand that generationally, I will never understand this 22-year-old person feeling their feels, but how can I create a sense of belonging? What do they need to be able to feel like they belong? Because it's not an either or. It's not about this generation feeling for the feeling included and this generation not. How do we create the both end in that space? How do we understand as learners, I'm okay with the fact that my tech skills are not as savvy as a 20-year-old. But some people feel quite affronted by that because they feel like it impacts how people would perceive them in their levels of competence.
Hmm.
But where could we share that knowledge and this person be the knowledgeable other in this space through experience, and this person be the knowledgeable other in terms of innovation because they've just had exposure and had more access. So
Right.
being able to ask those right questions, and it might start certainly with some, it might start with just that individual coaching around what that looks like and having a safe space to unpack their thoughts and feelings without fear of repercussion. Because if you've got those older generational type ideas, sometimes when you communicate that, it can, you're worried about flipping that up to HR because you've said the wrong thing in that kind of space. So having a safe space to unpack and help people recalibrate their thoughts into a way that they can express it in a way that might be received um, better.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of that older generation and some of the challenges that they're facing, many because they either can't afford to retire or choose not to because they want to stay vibrant and active and continue to contribute and make a difference, or both, um, are moving from out of corporate life, out of working, out of
Mm,
being an employee, but they've been raised as employees, and now really don't have any choices other than entrepreneurship because good luck getting a job. I don't know how it is in Australia, but in the rest of most of the world, if you're over 55, in some places, Mexico, it's 45 apparently, but if you're
wow.
55 or 60, you're
Mm,
not getting any kind of work um, in, in,
yeah.
in corporate America kind of thing. So they
Yeah.
have to become entrepreneurs. Many of them weren't raised that way, don't think they can do it. And in terms of making that kind of leap, shifting their mindset, getting
Mm,
up the courage and the will to be able to do that, what kind
mm,
of advice would you have for them? Because this is them stepping into a different area of leadership, of taking on new talent,
mm,
new skills. So,
mm.
what would you advise, or what resources would you advise? What support should they be getting? How can they make that transition better?
Yeah, I think so. The infinite leadership model that I designed is actually kind of a fit for purpose because each of the letters is its own pillar. So it helps people explore who my identity is now as this new role that I'm in. What kind of identity am I bringing to the table? What do I need to be aware of? What are the things that I'm worried about from letting go from this previous identity that I need to be mindful of coming into this identity? The nurturing is the emotional intelligence. The F is fearlessness. Like, what are the fears that I'm facing right now? And how am I holding myself back because of those fears in terms of taking this next stage? Innovation. What do I need to be able to innovate myself? Not necessarily innovation in terms of large organizational change, but continue to innovate myself because changing career or transitioning at that stage is an innovation of self.
Mhm.
Nobility, what does my, ego-free leadership is how do I remove my ego from this scenario to maybe go and learn something new that I'm not really comfortable with? How do I do that compassionately to myself and those around me? Influence is that communication piece. How do I create influence in my new role? T is transformation. How do I get that transformational approach? And then E is that ecosystem, which is so key. If you're moving from corporate into entrepreneurship, who are the people I need in my ecosystem to
Mhm.
support me on this next stage of my journey?
I love acronyms. I love how handy they are to be able to remember a lot of, a model or a framework. What was the first I?
Identity.
Identity, right?
So,
I got them all
yeah,
except that one. I was okay.
yeah.
And so those are sound like great things to explore. And on that note, when is your book coming out?
Yeah, so December 2024, my book will be released. So you'll be able to find it on Amazon and you'll be able to find it on my website, which we'll put in the show notes after this, if it interests anybody. And you'll be able to find me on socials. You'll be able to find a link to it
Okay.
to be able to purchase it.
Awesome. And so obviously you go through that framework of how people can up their leadership
Mm.
in each of these areas and using these components to help them become a better leader.
Yeah, whether that be personally or professionally.
Right. So just a couple more things in terms of older people that are reinventing themselves, because
Mm.
one of yours is uh, fearless or yeah,
Fearlessness.
fearlessness. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
so what are some techniques or skills to be more fearless?
Yeah. So one of them is there's a Native American proverb that talks about the water buffalo, that talks about that, when a storm is occurring, most animals will run away from the storm and run away from the fear around because they fear the storm. And what happens is the storm catches up to them and then they're actually in it for longer.
Mm,
The water buffalo is the only animal that runs towards the storm because they know that if they get through it, it's not because they love the storm, it's because they know if they can get to it fast, they can get through the other side faster.
mm,
So the first part is what are you fearful of? And again, generationally, people are like, oh, I'm not worried about anything, particularly maybe our gentlemen, listeners. They're like, oh, no, it's all right, it should be right. So having a safe space to actually unpack what those fears are. Fear I'm not going to be able to provide. Fear that I will, reputation. Fear that I'm past it. Fear that I'm not worthy enough. Fear that I don't know enough. Fear that I don't do this. So first of all, we are actually going to accurately write down what all of them are.
mhm,
And then there's a really good activity around, well, if that fear came true, what could happen? And what could you do to mitigate that risk?
mhm.
So now that we've kind of faced that fear and we've kind of gone through the worst case scenario, a lot of fears, we recognize that most instances, the anxiety we have around the fear is far worse than being faced with the problem in and of itself.
Right.
So we have to help people through that. So we have to name it. What action are we going to take? So am I going to sit in this fear, or what action am I going to take to move through that fear like the water buffalo? And how do I evaluate whether or not that strategy is a good strategy for me, or do I need a new strategy? And
Mhm.
I joke that I'm like the Mary Poppins of strategies. Mary Poppins used to pull all this stuff out of her bag. I'm like that with strategies. Never once have a client where I'm like, oh, I don't have any other strategies for you to try, because it's more about your access to strategies. Like, so, you live in your world with your worldview, and that just means that the strategies you've utilized have come from that. But if you expose yourself to other people that may have had different experience, they may have different strategies that you can pull out and try on and see if they fit.
Right. Which is why it's very beneficial to have a coach or mastermind group that you're part of, or
Mm.
counselors or people who have different tools in their toolkit that you can use
Mm.
that we may not have, because we
100%.
can't be the source of everything for ourselves. And,
Mm.
we can't create from something new with the same mind that created what currently exists. So, um,
Mm.
I really like the story. First of all, I haven't heard that story, uh, but the process of identifying what are the fears really, then really worst case scenarioing it. So then what might
Mm.
happen, and then what might happen, and getting down to that real bottom line, um, total end of the thread of the fear, then coming up with some mitigation strategies and turning that into an action plan. Now, what are you going to do about that? I think that's a
Mm.
really practical process. You are so smart about so many things. I would love to talk to you for hours and hours and hours, Kylie. What's some just one last thing you, not the final word for the thing, but what's one thing that you think most people who are thinking about leadership don't think about?
I think we forget that it starts with ourselves because we're so focused on our bottom line or our KPIs or the team that we're managing, and we can get outward focused when everything always starts with self. I think that's one thing. I think the other thing that happens is people get stuck in where they're at and also forget that this process is an ongoing learning, so continuous improvement. And once we accept that this is an ongoing journey, then we have less resentment about the load that we have to learn to get to the next level. If we
Mm.
just have more acceptance around that, rather than going, oh gosh, I've got to learn this other new thing. Oh gosh, I've got to learn this new thing. And just go, well, in my infinite journey, it's infinite learning, which creates infinite possibilities and infinite opportunities. And that just gives me a new level of acceptance to what could be.
Oh, I just made a note of for myself of where this clip is in here, because that was a brilliant piece of work that if people really took on and looked at and unpacked in their own life, could keep them busy for quite a while in terms of upping their excellence game.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Uh, I love all this. How can people find out more about you, reach out to you, get in touch?
Yeah. Yep. So you can find me on LinkedIn under my name, Kylie Leota. and on Facebook and Insta at Elements Number 4 Success, or my website, elementsforsuccess.com.au.
Okay, awesome. And the book comes out in December, so keep an eye out for that. Infinite Leadership, and infinite, of course, as we heard, was has some very specific meaning to it. I was wondering about that because it's all capitalized, so I figured it had to be an acronym. So some great information here. Please, ladies and gentlemen, pass these podcast episodes along. You never know who just needs to hear that one thing. So share it on your Facebook or LinkedIn. Please pass it along to friends. Invite you to subscribe to the podcast so that you get lots of different great perspectives. The people that I have on here are specifically selected for their expertise, but also more for their perspective. How can they help us think differently? The purpose of this podcast is for those who are too inspired to retire, but it's really about helping us all get different accesses to how we think about the world, about ourselves, about opportunities. We are shifting the status quo, and you cannot do that if you're thinking with the same thinking that got us and created the status quo. So there's a deeper purpose behind this podcast, and it's, to shatter ageist stereotypes, to reinvent what it means to age and sage and live at this stage. And we can't do that coming from the same thinking that created these prejudices and this situation we find ourselves in. So thank you, Kylee, for being a stand for people to really think differently about how they're showing up in the world, what they're modeling, who they're being, how they're impacting themselves and others, and really taking ownership of, like you said, starting with ourselves. The better that we are in terms of that awareness, self-management, and then self-expression, and being that change that we want to be, then the more of a gift we are in the world. And so I love that you are doing this work. It makes for better leaders. And like you said, we need a lot more of those.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's one last piece of it? So ladies and gentlemen, please go like, subscribe, leave some notes. If you have questions, please let me know. If you would like to be on the podcast, there's information in the show notes about how to do that. My hope is, as with every episode, that you don't just have this be something you listen to, but you have this be something that you action in your life. Take one of the tips that Kylee gave you today, or something that was said that inspired you, and turn it into something that you actually do differently in your world. Put it in your calendar, take action on it, make this something that is part of the change that you are creating in your life and the life of other people. All right, Miss Kylee, what's one last piece of advice you'd like to leave everyone with?
Yeah, I think it's as simple as this. Ordinary things done consistently create extraordinary.
Thank you. I needed that reminder.
Mhm.
All right. Thank you so much for being here and for getting up so early to be here. And thank you for listening. Please go forward and be your own version of extraordinary. Bye, everybody. Thank you for listening. I'd love it if you left a comment and subscribed. And I encourage you to apply one aha from this interview right away so you can turn your wisdom into wealth and your contribution into positive change. Bye for now.